Greetings. Welcome to the first DVD in the Teaching Techniques series. In this series, the objective is to provide visual demonstrations of common techniques used within the modelling community. These techniques are by no means the only ones out there, as, over the years, many techniques have been developed by very talented people. It is worthwhile to explore further the different versions of these common techniques, which can be found on modelling websites and blogs. There is also a large variety of different tools available from various companies, and the products used in this DVD are not necessarily better than others, as often availability and personal preference should be considered when choosing what to buy. However, the class of products used in this DVD, that is to say certain types of glues or tools, should be seriously considered for your workbench. In this first episode, the basics of aircraft modelling will be explored, with the ultimate aim of assisting you to be able to produce a model that is well constructed and visually impressive. Many models that draw people's attention are actually easier to create than one might think. The techniques demonstrated in this episode will allow you to create such a model with relative ease. While following techniques is certainly a large part of attaining a successful outcome, of equal importance is the need to be patient and to resist the urge to cut corners. Simply put, the degree of patience and care which you choose to put into your modelling project will be reflected in the final outcome. And so the best place to begin, as always, is at the start. When removing pieces from the sprue, it's highly recommended that you clip about 1 centimetre above the piece to be removed, as this will reduce the risk of the plastic being damaged by a stress fracture. If a fracture occurs, it can be easily corrected with putty once the piece has been glued. If you take a little extra care at this stage, you can save yourself some time later. With a sharp blade, begin trimming the stub. First trim it from either end. This is done to limit any tearing, which will occur if there is a stress fracture. Then, gradually trim and scrape until the whole side is flush. When gluing plastic to plastic, by far the best glue to use is liquid cement. This is available with either a brush applicator, which is more versatile, or with a tube. The cement is absorbed by the plastic and softens it. 2 or 3 generous applications are generally required. Allow the glue to pool slightly on the surface. You should also apply 1 or 2 coats on the other piece to be glued, then carefully join the 2 parts. You have several seconds to align the parts properly, and if the cement dries before a good join is made, then simply repeat the process. Once the parts are glued, it's worthwhile to clamp the parts together. There are many different types of clamps, and having a selection of various types can be useful, as there are different shapes and contours which you will no doubt encounter. It takes a few hours for the glue to set. Once dry, trim and scrape away any uneven areas or excess plastic. When you are at the stage of mating the fuselage halves together, or when installing any aftermarket or resin components, it is vital that you test fit to ensure that there is a snug and precise fit. Otherwise, things can get very messy once the glue goes down, and again, you will save yourself a great deal of time and frustration. Gluing large components, such as the fuselage, can be quite tricky. Instead of tackling it all in one hit, it is best to break it up into small, manageable sections. The best place to start is at the front of the aircraft. Glue both the top and bottom together with 3 applications of glue each. Once this is done, a cable tie or elastic band is used to keep the 2 halves firmly fused. It is also possible to dab various places with the glue, which, due to its thin viscosity, will run in between the 2 parts and be absorbed. Then the rear top and bottom are glued separately. A different approach is needed for this. Gently split the 2 sides apart, only a few millimeters, and run the glue applicator between the 2 sides. Repeat this process several times. Try and avoid applying too much glue, causing it to run down the side. But if this does occur, it can be easily corrected later through putty and/or sanding. One tool which has gained greater popularity in recent times is the micro chisel. These tools can be invaluable when attempting to work in hard-to-reach areas, where blades either struggle to get in or damage the surrounding parts. They can be quite cheap, and it's definitely worthwhile owning at least 1 or 2. Many plastic kits that have panels which require them to be glued onto the fuselage or wings often don't fit flush with the surrounding part. To make them flush, generally some plastic needs to be removed. This is a classic scenario where the chisel will outshine any blade, giving you greater control by removing only small amounts of plastic at a time. This can also be done by reducing the panel thickness, or a combination of the two in severe examples. There are 3 main types of superglue available on the market. Ultra thin, which is highly viscous and difficult to control, medium or standard, and finally the thick or gel type. They each have a place on the bench. All of them can be used straight out of the tube. However, this generally lacks any capacity to regulate the amount of glue applied. The thin and medium types can be used in combination with an applicator, which greatly reduces any spillage or excess glue on the surrounding plastic. If the applicators are not correctly cleaned, they can become a one-use item and therefore quite pricey. They may still be worth the cost given the substantial savings in time and frustration. The thin superglue is used for general gluing and for gluing photo etch parts. The medium superglue is used primarily for filling gaps, especially in tricky places such as the wing roots. Here you can see this being done. Generally, putty is then applied over the top. However, in some situations this may be unnecessary, especially if the glue has been totally contained within the gap. When deciding whether to use putty on top, keep in mind that sanding down putty will produce superior results when compared to sanding glue. The thick superglue, like the thin, is also used for general gluing and for photo etch parts. This glue is the best for gluing the final pre-painted parts, such as the undercarriage and its doors, at the very end of the project. For best results, squeeze some glue onto a solid surface, such as a paint lid, and then use any rounded applicator to dab the glue onto the part. A word of warning: never use superglue to fix clear parts, as it will make them fog up and ruin them. The one thing that is nearly impossible to fix without replacing the part is the canopy. It is also the one mistake that can spoil the look of the whole model instantly. To attach the canopy and other clear parts, special glue is available and is highly recommended that it be used. This glue is usually called clear part cement or something along those lines. There are many different scribers on the market. Some are targeted directly at the modelling community, while others are more general purpose and are available from hardware stores. The feel and success that you will have with a scriber is likely to be a very personal thing, and therefore it is almost impossible to recommend one type over another. Once again, some research within modelling websites is worthwhile to gain some feedback from other people's experiences. Having said that, here is one method using various types of scribers which works well. It should be noted that this method seeks to enhance the visual appearance of panels rather than ensuring that they remain to scale. The first step is to deepen the panel line. This will ensure that the ink wash will remain in the panel lines during the cleanup process. Run the scriber very gently along the line at the first instance, putting almost no pressure on it at all. This will create a scratch, which, like water flowing along a wet path, will guide the scriber along the line on future passes. Now run the scriber along the line several times, until 1 millimeter or 2 of plastic has been removed. The second part is to remove any plastic built up along the sides of the line. For this, a scriber with a V-shaped tip is used. Holding it at an angle, first run along one side and then along the other. Alternatively, you can use a hobby knife to achieve this. However, it is more difficult to achieve a consistent result. The final step is to clear out the panel line of any plastic, using a simple pointed and somewhat blunt scriber. Once the model is constructed, it's now time to fill in and correct any errors that you have made, or flaws in the kit itself. In addition to any such errors, there will always be a need to fill in every seam along the fuselage and the leading edges of the wings. This should be done as a matter of course, as they are often highly visible, and by applying putty on all of the seams, you will create consistency. There are many different types of putty available, ranging from the more traditional paste types through to the liquid putty. Different forms of putty can be applied in combination with each other. Often the paste type putty can be a little grainy and is better used as a true filler, whilst the liquid putty is superb as the final surface to be sanded back. It usually takes approximately 6 hours for the putty to set properly, depending on the type and brand. However, it is highly recommended that you leave it for 24 to 48 hours to ensure the best result. Mr. Surfacer 1200 is used on this project, and due to its thin consistency, several coats are required with a drying time of a few hours in between. Generally speaking, applying too much putty is better than too little, as any excess will be removed anyway. When applying the putty, try to avoid the panel lines. However, this is not a major concern as they can be easily re-scribed. Before sanding, gently cut away the putty with a hobby blade, which is held at an angle almost horizontal to the surface. This should be done with a reasonably fresh, if not new, blade. Then, gently scrape the surface with the blade positioned perpendicular to the surface. Do not apply heavy pressure, and try to avoid removing any plastic. Remember that sanding will still be done after this, and this is only intended to remove the bulk of any excess. This will give you a good indication if there are any imperfections or mist spots, as well as any air bubbles that may have found their way under the putty. If there are any imperfections, simply reapply additional coats and repeat the process until you are satisfied. The purpose of sanding is to bring the plastic back to a smooth gloss, creating a blank and consistent surface for the paint to adhere to. To this end, a series of different grades of sandpaper is used. If you used a blade to trim the putty down beforehand, then a good starting grade is 800. However, if you elected not to do this process, and there is a reasonable amount of putty applied, then 400 or 600 grade would be more appropriate. When sanding, ensure that the paper is sufficiently wet. To this end, simply dip the paper in the water periodically. It is important to sand in one direction, preferably parallel to the direction of the airflow. This will ensure that the increasingly finer grades of paper will be able to smooth out the grooves created by the previous grade. Some surfaces are less practical to sand in the direction of the airflow, and thus a direction should be chosen that is the easiest to execute. The most important thing is that the direction of sanding remain consistent. Having cut the paper into manageable squares, vary the area that you use around so that the majority of the surface gets used. Periodically wipe down the surface with a wet tissue to assist in tracking of your progress. It is worthwhile replacing the paper on a regular basis to ensure its effectiveness. Once sanding with the 2000 grade sandpaper has been completed, it is time to polish the plastic using a soft cloth and polishing compound. Tamiya's fine polishing compound is used first, followed by the finish polishing compound. Dab a little of the compound on the cloth or directly on the model. Then simply rub the plastic, ensuring that there is sufficient compound left on the cloth. The direction of the motion is not relevant at this stage, and in fact, circular motions may produce better results depending on the surface curvature. It is worthwhile rubbing down the whole model with both grades of polishing compound, as this will give you a more consistent result across the whole model. Wipe the model down with either a wet cloth or tissue after each of the compound pastes. The panel lines that were lost during the sanding stage are now re-scribed. Stiff plastic tape, the type used in label makers such as Dynamo, is used as a guide for the scriber. This tape can be reused multiple times on either edge. Make sure that the tape is aligned properly, and then simply apply pressure onto the scriber whilst simultaneously pushing into the tape.